So let's talk about Crush, your new feature film. Your last feature, True Love, was also comprised of vignettes. You decided to do an anthology with Crush again. Why did you choose to do that?
And I always feel like I have, stories to tell and want to tell them that way.
A budget can often dictate what is included and excluded from a film. Obviously made a difference with Bloodline being in Crush, but did you have to change locations or some of your casting decisions, etc., based on how much money was involved?
Oh yeah. There were definitely certain stories were cheaper to make than other stories. Bloodline was one of the most expensive ones, but it did dictate sort of the rest of the film. It's like, well, I need one or two stories that are a little cheaper to make and that sort of thing. But it didn't affect casting that much because, for the most part, the cast and crew were all volunteers, so it wasn't that kind of an issue. But it was more just the production end of it.
And you're wearing a lot of hats in this film: writer, producer, editor, director, casting director, all of that. Do you like that part of it, or would you prefer to have someone else maybe taking some of the duties off for you, or do you like the control of having all of those things happening for you?
I worked on projects in both worlds, and I enjoy doing each of those jobs. I don't always enjoy having to do them all at the same time and do all of the other things I do in my life. But I do enjoy each one of those roles, separately. On the other hand, it would be great to have 20 people on my team who each had a job to do. But that sets up a whole other. I'm kind of a control freak anyway, so it works sometimes to be the master of the puppet master. So
What's your favorite part about making this film?
I think my favorite part of working on every film is working with the people that come on board to help, because it really is kind of a little family unit, and people come on board because they want to come on board, not necessarily because they're getting paid.
Well, you have a lot of returning crew members from True Love was shot, what, 7 years ago now?
About 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah, and some of your ADs are the same and all of that, so they obviously believe in your work, and it must be a little less stressful, at least having someone that you've worked with before.
Oh, it's always great to have friends on the set, because you just feel much more comfortable because you know people, you know what they're going to do. Shea Pittman came back as AD, and she just has this real calming way about her, and it doesn't matter what's going on, and she just can hang with it. Just everything's kind of fun, and she does it because she enjoys it. So,
you had the same DP for all of these vignettes, correct? How was it working with David as your DP? He seems like a pretty chill kind of guy.
He was very chill.
And how did you find him?
He was a real find, and there was only one day that he didn't shoot, and someone else shot, but he shot everything else. And he was chill. He's one of those guys that always says, yeah, we can do that. My favorite saying of his is, I have a plan. I say, how can we do this? He says, I have a plan, and he'll run off and do it. And I don't have to worry about it. He's a lot of fun. Very nice guy.
One of the things that I find interesting about Crush is all the stories involve interracial couples. Did you, was that a conscious decision when you went into filming, or were they written that way, or did that sort of just happen in the casting process?
Well, here's the thing. I kind of feel like our community, the gay and lesbian community, without getting too weird and philosophical about it, I mean, our flag is a rainbow, and I do think that we are a really diverse sort of sub-community. I mean, when you're in our community, you go to clubs or whatever, you see people of all kinds there, and I just feel like the stories should reflect that to me, and I think gay and lesbian filmmakers are really good at doing that. The funny thing is that I tend to write every character as if it's me. I always tell actors to go ahead and play with the dialogue, make it their own, because they always talk like I talk.
Yeah.
And when I cast, then I tend to open up the characters. There are very few characters that I will list in a casting breakdown as Caucasian. Every once in a while I will, but very few. And that allows me to get all of these other actors in to play roles. And I never thought of an Asian actor in the role of in Breathe, for instance.
Oh, really?
Because that's really me in real life. That's me.
Mm-hmm.
But when Dennis came in, and I thought, wow, this would be really great, and it sort of for me added a whole other texture to the role that I never even thought of. So that's always fun.
Well, it is interesting because I think you cast against type for a few actors, especially in Bloodline, where I think you had an Asian actor, Nick, playing really against type, I think, of what we usually see Asian actors playing. Was that intentional?
Not at all. In fact, Nick had come in and auditioned for a couple of other films that never got made, but I always had him in the back of my mind because he's a really good actor. And he's one of those actors who just wants to get out there and work and do things. And he's very open-minded and very open to work, which is always very exciting. So when it was kind of suggested that he play this role, and I hadn't really thought of him in that way, we brought him in and then thought, well, why not? I think this is really interesting. And what's even more interesting is there's nothing in the story about the fact that he's Asian.
Yeah.
He just happens to be this guy who's a vampire, and he just happens to be Asian. And that's what I think is delicious about it, and really hopefully makes the audience think of things in a different way.
Well, Don't Ask was the first sequence filmed, correct? Well over a year ago, prior to the November election, the presidential election. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell is very much in the political forefront of the news right now. Do you think that story would be told differently now, a year later? Do you think you would have written it a little differently?
I did think about for a second, well, how does that change my story? Will it change my story 5 years from now when somebody watches it? And I don't think it will. I think that no matter what happens, I think we still have to remember that this was a part of history, in our country.
How do you think growing up in the Midwest influenced your storytelling? Is there a sort of innocence that you brought into this film from your own childhood to tell these stories?
Oh yeah, I think there's a part of me that's still, still that adolescent kid in Ohio, coming out in the 70s. I mean, that was really kind of part of it, because I think there's a beauty to holding on to that innocence, and it's kind of a place to, it's kind of a happy place to go sometimes, and sometimes not such a happy place. But yeah, that does come a lot, I think, from growing up in the Midwest and the time and place. And
of the stories that are in Crush, which one is the most representative of you personally?
Well, I'd have to say Breathe, just because it is kind of a story from my own life, or an experience from my own life.
How's that?
Well, really is kind of the experience that I had with the first boy that I fell in love with when I was a teenager, an adolescent. And it was just a really important, pivotal moment in my life. It both was a time when I was coming out to myself and trying to figure out what was going on in my life. And it's the first time I ever came out to another person. And I was a teenager, so I was in love, and so all these flowery, I was floating around, and being just in love, and so those are really precious, kind of wonderful moments that I hold dear to me.
You mentioned a lot of art and the drawing in that piece. There's also, obviously, Strokes is heavily influenced by art. These have got to be your stories, correct? This is your work that's represented in the film, correct?
Yeah.
Your art really permeates actually this whole film. A lot of your paintings are involved in Bloodline and in Strokes, and it's your sketches in Breathe, correct?
And I have to say, it was really not intentional that each one of the characters in each one of the stories has some sort of artistic talent or art in it. I think maybe except for Don't Ask.
Well, are you getting a lot of unexpected attention for your art now because there's so much of it that's being seen?
I wish. We'll see when the film comes out if there's any more interest in my art.
Did you unexpectedly find a way to fund your film by selling the pieces that you made for it?
Well, a little bit. Actually, I did just happen to sell a few pieces while we were shooting the film.
Many of the characters in your stories are sort of tormented or struggling with their circumstances in one way or another. But what is interesting is that none of them seem to be struggling with their sexuality. There's a sort of no denial of being gay. Do you think that there's a whole new generation of gay youth that seem to just take that being gay is fine and not really struggling with that, the way they would have been, say, gay films that would have been made 10 or 20 years ago?
Yeah. I think the issues are different from when I was growing up. It's not so much coming out and being persecuted at school, and not that that doesn't still happen, certainly. And I think the coming out process for everybody is probably difficult no matter what your situation is. But there's so many of us now, or there's a culture and a community now, that I think now what's interesting to me is sort of looking at us as people. How do we react to each other? How do we treat each other? How do we fit into the world?
Well, you said that Strokes has some of your own personal experiences involved in it. If you were looking at the character of Michael or the character of Robert, which one is most similar to you?
Well, luckily I'd have to say I'm a little bit of both. There are very strong parts of Robert in me, and I'm not happy about that, but I admit it. And there are very strong parts of Michael in me too.
Well, let's talk about this for a second. Let's talk about your budget for this film. You shot True Love 6 years ago. Was the budget similar to what you're shooting with Crush?
Yeah, very similar. It's about the amount of a small economy car. And yeah, that's pretty true.
Well, great. Well, hopefully we don't have to wait another 5+ years for your next film.
Yeah, I hope not.
Well, thank you. Thanks
you.
for congratulations on your new film,
Thank you.
Crush.